Alright. So I basically I got the idea that I felt like Harvey should have been against something.
Right.
But I couldn't figure out what it was. And that's why I was trying to figure out imaginary friend movies. Like I said, the only thing that kept coming to mind was Drop Dead Fred. And I was like, that's... With Harvey, I don't think that works. So, but then eventually, the Beaver finally came to me, and it just so happens, this happens to fall on the weekend of Money Monster, which is another movie directed by Jodie Foster. So it was like, yeah, I think this is good enough. We'll go. That's what this has come to. This works well enough. We'll just go with it. If you don't like it, just go somewhere else, asshole. Okay, so I'm going to start with the Beaver, actually, which lends itself to so many double entendres, but not in this case. No, there's actually no jokes in this movie about Mel Gibson having his hand up a beaver. Not even one. That might have to do with the movie's PG-13 rating, I don't know. But, obviously when you talk about the Beaver, there's just something... There are so many things that come to mind. But the first thing you kind of want to address is the time frame in which this movie came out, which was 2011. And this was kind of the year after those leaked phone calls came out. And basically everybody wanted to be Mel Gibson's enemy, or make Mel Gibson an enemy. And he was basically, like, everybody was just shunning him, and he was, forget that he's, like, one of these great Hollywood filmmakers and all that, and that, shit. I mean, I'm not gonna, totally dismiss, the shit that he said and done by any means. It's just the whole separating the artist thing. But people really, just a total and complete shitstorm came down on him after this. He's got 2 Oscars. We don't care. He is the devil now. But he still had a few friends in the industry that are trying to keep him up. One of which was Jodie Foster. So she made this movie, and it was going to star the recently shunned Mel Gibson as a guy that walks around and only talks to people through a beaver puppet. Needless to say, the whole concept was attention grabbing for everyone. And whether it be good or bad, when you tell this to people, it certainly has their attention. Whether they're saying, I will never watch that in a million years, or, well, that's interesting, I really should probably see what the fuck this is. And there's, and it's kind of hard to really, pull this out of that concept, but it's a family drama. I don't mean a drama for families, I mean a drama about families. No, PG-13 rating aside, I don't think you just gather the family around and say, hey, let's watch Mel Gibson cut his arm off to get his possessed beaver puppet off of him. We don't do that. No, I actually did show this movie to my family all at once, though. I really did.
How'd that go over?
I think they thought it was okay. It was basically more of, it's really, because it's just one of those movies where it's just like, you're not gonna believe me, so just sit down and watch this. And sure enough, this movie does in fact exist. And we begin with the family's breaking apart, where Anton Yelchin's the older son that doesn't want to be like the dad, and the dad's going through depression, and the marriage is kind of dissipating, and he's getting distant, and then eventually he moves out and goes elsewhere. And then we have when you can tell already that the story is quite personal for Gibson in regards to his character basically is in this room and he gets drunk and is crying. He gets really, really drunk. But the thing is like, and it's dramatic, but they also, you know, make it funny with he's watching the TV show or the movie or whatever it is with the monks, and he goes up to the TV and he wants to give the monk a hug, so he hugs the TV and then tries to give it a drink. I love his disappointment with he dumps the alcohol on the TV and the monks kind of walk away and he's just sadly like, "Oh, you moved." And this eventually leads to him attempting suicide by hanging himself by the shower curtain rod. Only after he's found this beaver puppet in the dumpster when he's throwing all his shit away. And just as he's about to commit suicide and jump off this balcony, the beaver comes to life. And he ends up falling back into the room in shock, and the TV falls on him and knocks him unconscious. And when he wakes up, the beaver has basically taken on a life of its own. And I love the fact that he doesn't even, there's no ventriloquism here. He does not hide the fact that his own mouth is talking at all. He and the beaver are talking simultaneously, and there is no hiding it. And then he eventually tries to win back his family by talking to the beaver, through the beaver, saying that his doctor prescribed it for him, when in actuality, he hasn't been to his doctor in over a year, and he's kind of insane. And yeah, it's mainly a comedy. For sure, but it's very, very clear that we're going into some dark places. But it takes us, I don't know, they come in and out, but it takes us a little while to get to the dark places. For the most part, it's just this very silly comedy that seems like it would be, I don't know, almost like a Jim Carrey movie in the 90s or something, when it gets to the point to when he actually gets famous for the beaver. And they sell toys and shit, his company and all that. And yeah, and Foster really does have, unlike, say, Money Monster, she really has a good handle on the tone here. For the most part. Sometimes it gets a little pretty far out there. And then we have two simultaneous stories going on here that are basically our focal points, and that is, well, no, there's actually a whole lot of stuff going on here. Okay, there's three main focal points, I guess. And that is the focus between Gibson and Jodie Foster trying to get their marriage to work. Gibson basically trying to win over Anton Yelchin, who's basically shunned him. And the blossoming love story between Anton Yelchin and Jennifer Lawrence. In one of her really early parts, this was like her... This and Like Crazy were the same year. Mm-hmm. God forbid I ever have to say that movie's name again or talk about it. Wasn't that bad? But this was like her first or second performance after her Oscar nomination for Winter's Bone, when she was really starting to. This was pre-Hunger Games, so not many people, really only the people that knew Winter's Bone knew her, unless they were Bilingual fans. She was very much still in the indie crowd at this point, which this movie pretty much falls under. So. This was before she was who she is now. And yes, for these early performances, she kind of showed that star quality she would ultimately have here. I think people have mixed feelings on Anton Yelchin. But he's perfectly fine here. I really like basically his main problem is he keeps track of what kind of mannerisms and the personality traits he has in common with Gibson. And he's trying really, really hard to not just literally become him, even though they basically act the same way. And he's basically spends the whole movie in fear that when he gets older, he might end up with a beaver on his hand also. And the idea is to prevent that. And yeah, it does set itself up for a lot of drama. Lawrence's character has a whole tragic backstory herself, on top of all this stuff. But then you throw stuff in, like, even when it's kind of setting up dramatic points, like the fact that he just cannot get away from the Beaver and cannot just be himself. Like the moments when they're getting ready to go to the anniversary dinner, and he says, "I got something. It's real, real special." And she gets real excited, and she's like, "What kind of anniversary gift is this?" And he whips out a tiny little tux that the Beaver is going to wear. And it's just, this is the kind of movie where you're really not quite sure how to register what you're looking at for a while. Because it's like, is this profound drama that's really saying something about this guy's inner demons? Or is this the fucking stupidest thing I have ever seen in my life? I can't tell. It really could be one extreme or the other. But I think they handle it really well. And then there is the way they handle his kind of mood swings about how things are really happy and him using the Beaver is kind of silly, but it's also harmless. But then there keep being these shades keep showing up about a darker side to this. One particular scene I think is really well handled is when he loses his cool at the anniversary dinner, and the Beaver starts to have the Beaver has this angry monologue. And typically, for most of the movie, we see him and the Beaver side by side, to where we can see him talking, or the camera's strictly on the Beaver. Like they're two separate entities. But the way this scene is framed was really well, because this is one of the few times in the movie where we see the Beaver's face in front of his own. And he's kind of, like, you can see his eyes over the Beaver's head, but it's basically like, it's almost like a visual cue that the Beaver is starting to take over in a not so healthy way. Not that this was healthy to begin with, but that it's getting to an extreme level. How much the Beaver has taken over him. And then it gets in that dark territory where, we're heading in a dark direction when he goes and he's in the office with Cherry Jones and he's like, I have something I have to tell you. And he's like, I'm not actually a puppet. I'm real. And you're like, where the fuck is this going?
Yeah.
And then sure enough, for about 5 or 10 minutes, this movie turns into a thriller. When the Beaver confronts him. It's basically saying that Walter is the Beaver now, and there's nothing he can do about it unless he fights him. And he gets into a physical fight with the Beaver. Yes, the Beaver, that is a puppet attached to his hand, he gets into a physical altercation with. That's actually quite violent.
Yeah.
Like, there's bloodshed. And then we ultimately get to that solution, which I mentioned at the beginning of the video, that is just, whoa, how did we end up here? But it actually kind of all makes sense when you watch it as a whole. And there's if there's one thing I kind of have that's a bit of a problem. There are problems here and there. One thing I notice about this movie is that though it is good and it's got a lot of good things going for it, it's kind of really poorly edited. Like everything feels right. Like Foster's got the tone right, and then you've got this really stellar Mel Gibson performance, and Foster's really good in it too, especially that anniversary dinner thing. But then the way it's cut feels like really, really amateur kind of student movie almost, like somebody who doesn't quite know, because there's like Lawrence's introduction feels really abrupt. Like she's just suddenly like a major character in this movie, and there's no real build up to her at all. And then there's not real, for a while there, the scenes don't really flow. Like there's not really kind of a flow to the movie at all. It just kind of, the scenes just kind of happen one right after the other, and it just kind of feels a little sloppily put together. And then there are those moments where it's yeah, I wouldn't, well, this is going off the editing now, but, there's kind of, well, no, maybe not. There's, there's kind of it's an odd thing about Yelton's character. One particular scene, and I'm not quite sure if it's just not well placed or what it is, but Yelton basically spends the whole movie resenting Gibson. There's really not anything else he does in regards to that character. Like, he exists basically to resent Gibson and hopes to not be him. But there's that one scene that really never comes back into play until, like, the very last scene of the movie. And that is when it's Gibson's first night back, which really pisses off Anton Yelchin, because he and Jodie Foster were basically, you know, their marriage had not been good for a long time. And she finally got to the point where Gibson was out of the house. And the very next night he was back in, only doing the puppet thing. And so he finds this totally unacceptable. But there's that little moment where he's in the living room watching Jon Stewart, while who does come back later for his own cameo. And Jodie Foster, the younger kid, and Gibson are in the kitchen, and he's doing the Beaver thing. And Yelchin kind of has this little happy moment. Like, he's kind of happy Gibson's back, and the Beaver's not so bad, and it's actually kind of funny. But then he just never feels that way again. Like, it doesn't feel like I hinted anything when you see the whole product. It's like, it gives us the idea that there is a chance that he will be okay with Gibson being back. And there's a chance for them to kind of have that relationship. Until the very last scene of the movie, that scene doesn't make a whole lot of sense. Because in the very next scene, he hates Gibson again for doing the Beaver, and that's the way it is for the rest of the movie. That scene just kind of stuck out to me, but, so, yeah, it was, and there are moments where it does kind of lose steam, like the moments when he gets famous, kind of feels like a detour. I get why it needs to be in there, because it's like, if this guy were to do this, especially since he's the CEO of a big company, it would most likely make news, at least a little. Probably not as much in real life as it did in the movie, but it would certainly, you know, people would know about it. But, I mean, regardless of its weirdness and its darkness, there's also something really sweet and heartwarming in it. It's definitely there's whole family qualities to it, and the love story between Yelchin and Jennifer Lawrence is nice too. Even though we do get the moments where it's that's another kind of, we get stuck in that territory where it's the guy messes up and the girl won't talk to him or answer his calls, and she walks away angrily when he's trying to explain himself. We do have to deal with that, but it's but for the most part, it does really, you really have to admire it for just really going for something, like I said, not just the fact that it was a Mel Gibson starring movie at that time in Mel Gibson's life, but the concept itself is a hard sell. You have to really, really be passionate about an idea to go for it when it's like this. And you can tell that passion is in it. It's not like a cripplingly emotional movie, but it's definitely got those moments in it that kind of, you know, touch you in the right place and all that. Like I said, the one thing that really, really sells it is how good Gibson's performance is. Because that's another thing. Like, he's a great director and, you know, producer and all that. But his acting is right on par with that. Not many people... I mean, people like him and stuff like Lethal Weapon and Mad Max and stuff like that, but they don't seem to realize that he's a really, really good actor, too. Like I said, even his part in Lethal Weapon took a lot of acting, regardless of it being an action movie. So yes, he's definitely... I've been waiting for that, you know, huge comeback, like he was doing. Like, he did the part in Machete Kills, and then he was the villain in Expendables 3.
Yeah.
But I'm just kind of, I'm hoping that we can get to that point eventually. Maybe when he gets, like, really old, he'll have, like this Bruce Dern-style resurgence or something.
Would be nice. I mean, he was doing fine for a while, and he's kind of fallen off.
Doing fine is an understatement. He was fucking Mel Gibson for a long time. But... things are the way they are, and But yeah, this movie found a little bit of an audience, I think. A tiny audience. But the appreciation is certainly there for people that are willing to give it that go. So real quick, let's go over to a classic now with Harvey. Which is another movie that I think is more famous for its plot than the movie itself. Yes, Jimmy Stewart plays a 42-year-old guy that walks around with his best friend, who happens to be a white bunny that is, 6 foot and 3/4, 3 1/4 or something inches. And basically everybody in the town thinks he is totally and completely insane, up to and including his sister, who is trying to get him put into a mental hospital. But he's just so happy and oblivious to the world around him that things always just kind of... He's almost like Forrest Gump before Forrest Gump. He's so oblivious to the world that things always fall in his favor by accident. So, and we get this opening, and we're not quite sure how we're going to take him at the start, because the first time we see him, he's just walking down the street, and he's like letting Harvey walk in front of him and all that. And he's just kind of walking and being his happy, oblivious self. And then we see the reactions of everybody in his vicinity. And how basically, it's like everybody dreads him. Like nobody wants to be around him because I don't know if they're afraid of him, or they just don't want the awkwardness. It could be a number of things. Like when they're prepping a party, and they're trying to keep Elwood away from the house, and the maids are leaving because they're expecting him. And then there is when they're at the office, and they're like, "You need to go follow him and make sure he doesn't go to the house." And the guy's just like, "Can't you get somebody else? Can't you get somebody else to follow him, please?" And you get those, you get the people that take advantage of him. Like, they have drinks at the bar, and then they say, "Oh, don't worry, the invisible guy at the end of the bar will take care of my tab." And of course, he's all for it, because Elwood's such a happy person that just wants to be friends with everybody. He has that little character trait where he introduces himself, and then he gives you a card. It's not a business card. It just has his phone number on it. Just in case you want to hang out. He's always so concrete. He's so confrontational about the plans too. He's like, "Oh, we'll do this. You can come by the bar tonight." And they're like, "Oh, I'm busy tonight." And it's like, "Well, how about tomorrow?" And then it's towards the end. It's like, "Oh yeah, you can have dinner with my family." When? No, tell me when. He's very confrontational about his plan making because he wants everything so concrete when he's meeting and hanging out with people. And the interesting thing about it is, I mean, I think it was mainly the censors in 1950. But regardless, I still find it a bit interesting that basically we're under the impression this stems from the idea that Elwood is an alcoholic. Because that's all he does is hang out at the bar and talk to an invisible rabbit. But the issue is that there is one scene, there is one moment in the entire movie where we see him take a drink. Through the whole movie. And I always liked how that's... apparently it was because of the censors, and he is, a straight-up alcoholic. But I do kind of like the theory that, given some reveals we have later, too, that maybe he's not the alcoholic that we think he is.
Yeah.
And he just happens to be happy all the time. It's just a coincidence that the guy that spends all of his time at the bar happens to be happy all the time. It's not because he's drunk, actually. No, I understand, because it's based on a play, and it's to my understanding, I think in the play, it's revealed that he does, in fact, love alcohol. But regardless of that, it's really fun to watch how everything kind of plays in his favor without him even trying to. And like I said, mainly coming from the fact that he's just so oblivious to the world around him. And he's mainly stemming from the fact that he's under the impression that everybody else can see Harvey too. And it's kind of everybody else's fault because they basically kind of play along with it. Just to kind of... I guess keep it. Nobody. I guess because he's so friendly with everybody, nobody wants to be the one to say there's nothing there. So we think.
It's also safe to do it that way too, just in case. You never know.
And there's always those lucky moments where you think that moment is coming, where he's talking to somebody that doesn't know about this whole situation, because it's such a classic comedy plot turn that his sister goes to take him to the mental hospital, and the more she talks about Harvey, the more they think she's the crazy one, and they try to lock her up instead. It's worth noting, Josephine Hall, I think is her name, plays his sister, and she actually won an Oscar for this, for supporting. Because she's just this, it's definitely a performance you can tell comes from the stage, because she actually did the role on stage before the movie, and it's a very, very showy performance, because she's just constantly, not only frantic about everything Elwood puts her through, but the fact that she's trying to convince everybody else that he's out of his mind while simultaneously losing her own mind. And that's basically the whole comedic setup for most of the movie. As she tries desperately to get him locked up in this mental hospital as the orderlies are taking her in instead. Especially when she confesses to the fact that she's almost positive she saw Harvey once. And she's like, don't tell anybody I said this, but I'm pretty sure I saw that motherfucker once. Also, she didn't say that.
That would have been great if she did. And that was PG back then, too.
They remade it for TV with Harry Anderson and Swoozie Kurtz in the parts.
Oh, wow.
And they didn't... and Leslie Nielsen playing Cecil Kellaway's part as the Doctor.
What year in the 80s was this?
It was 1996, I think.
Oh, my God,
yeah.
Really?
It's not a good adaptation. But...
Right off of Night Court, and there he is.
Yeah, I mean, he does okay with it, but it's...
He was a decent actor. I mean, I don't know what happened to him, though.
It's just not it just wasn't a great adaptation, was the problem.
I think Dave's World just kind of put him off the face of the earth.
But there's always those moments where, like, he's talking to somebody that's under the impression that he's sane, and then just as that reveal is coming, and he's about to introduce Harvey to them, he always gets cut off. And it's like that he's... just every time it comes so close for him saying... here's my invisible rap friend, he always gets cut off. And that's why everybody who doesn't know him believes that he's sane. And then I really love the scene with the nurses. When they finally have him, but then they realize that they think the sister's the crazy one and they're going to let Elwood go. And how he's just like, well, I guess I'll go with you, but this nurse was going to give me a bath and she really seemed to have her heart set on it. And then there's the moments when he's talking to Harvey, but people think he's talking to them. And I love when he's saying, like, he turns to Harvey and he says, "You really need a bath." And the nurse thinks he's talking to her, and she says, "I have a bath every day, thank you." And he just walks away going, "Well, that's a good way to start the day." He's just so in his own world, and it somehow manages to keep him out of trouble every time. And then if there's one problem I have with the movie, though, there's a lot of characters in it. For a movie about a dude and his imaginary friend, there's a lot of characters in this movie with subplots. I think Sanderson is the other doctor's name. The whole subplot with him and the girl, and then there's the whole thing with the guy that's trying to get his sister in there ends up falling for Myrtle May, and there's a whole bunch of tie-ins, and then the cab driver comes into it, and there's kind of a lot going on, but it's still, it sets up for a lot of comedic moments that they time and perfect really well. Victoria Horn plays Myrtle May. I also think she's really good also. She obviously, pretty much nobody else got attention except for Stewart and Josephine Hall, but still, everybody else is really good, and Victoria Horn she doesn't have to do a whole lot, but there's just something about the kind of straight way she plays the character, especially when she starts falling for the orderly dude. It just adds to the whole comedy of it. I guess it goes without saying, Stewart was nominated for this, and a lot of people consider it one of his best performances, which is really saying something. This was 10 years after his Oscar win, and 11 years after stuff like Mr. Smith and stuff like that. Like, going on Mr. Smith, it's kind of like, I wouldn't say this movie feels like a Capra movie. It's very, it doesn't feel quite like a Capra movie, but it feels like a Capra performance from him. If that makes sense to you. The scene the really long scene where he tells us the story of how he met Harvey and how Harvey came to be is a really good scene, and probably what secured that Oscar nomination for him. And yet there is, to get somebody whose likability and just presence and happiness gets them out of any kind of trouble they might get into, Jimmy Stewart's just kind of the perfect person for this part. That's another thing, when going into the remake, I was thinking, like, potentially Harry Anderson can pull this off, but how is anybody going to play Elwood without just turning in a Jimmy Stewart impersonation? Because it seems like that's all you could do. He did kind of make it his own, but it's just like, this is pretty much the only way this part should be seen. It's nothing against Harry Anderson. He did probably the best that he could, but there's just, I'm not even sure why they tried. I really don't. Especially, 46 years later?
Good gosh.
But yeah, they did anyway. And they do, there's some really good directorial techniques. I really like, the framing in the scene where, he has he takes the picture of their mother down, and he puts up a painting of him and Harvey. Harvey's actually in the painting, of course. And it's just on the wall, and the sister doesn't know that the painting has been replaced. So she's basically walked into the room, and she's talking, and she's frantic about how Harvey's taken over her life. And in the background is the painting, and she has not seen it yet, but we know before this scene is over, while she's already frantic now, she's gonna see the painting. That she knows used to be where the painting of her mother was. And we're just waiting for her to see it, which is a really good comedic setup. And there was one thing, I always liked this whenever I watched it, and then I looked it up and I found out that it was Jimmy Stewart's idea, which makes it even better. And that is a lot of scenes when Elwood is there, the shot is a little wider, like off of him,
mm-hmm.
or if he's sitting here and there's an empty space next to him, the camera makes sure the empty space is there. So it's like Harvey is in all the shots. I always really love that. I think the last thing I probably want to touch on is, it probably seems a little ridiculous with all this build-up. I haven't talked to enough people that have seen it, so I've never really had this conversation with anybody, so I don't know how people feel. I don't know how people feel about the ending.
Okay.
It's basically a reveal, where we see, he's walking around and he's been looking for Harvey all night and he can't find him. There's also that really great moment when he's on the phone with his sister and he says, like, she kind of lies and says, "Oh, Harvey's here. He's in the bathtub." And then he's just kind of talking. And he's like, "Oh, no, I'm here at the bar and Harvey just walked in." "You better go look in the bathtub. There's probably a stranger in there." But then finally, he walks into the room and he's like, "Oh, Harvey, there you are. I've been looking everywhere for you." And the chair's moving by itself. And then he actually opens a door by himself too, and we're basically under the impression that Harvey is real. But it's really fun to have that open perspective for most of the movie. Like, if you don't want to necessarily, I mean, I don't know how you explain the moving chair and the door opening by itself, but or the gate opening up by itself, but when you watch the movie, it's kind of fun to have the perspective of watching it as either Harvey's always there, or these are the ravings of a lunatic. Which also really helps to see the kind of character reactions around them also. So, yeah, I mean, obviously Harvey is the classic, and it's kind of that's kind of where you're always going to go. It's Jimmy Stewart as this character in this movie is just kind of legendary, and that's, like, this is the part he's kind of most known for. Mm-hmm. Like, any time you see a comedian do a Jimmy Stewart impression, which a lot of them do, there's almost always a reference to a rabbit. And with all the other roles he had, It's a Wonderful Life, Mr. Smith, all that stuff. The Philadelphia Story was his Oscar-winning part, but that kind of doesn't get brought up as much as the others. And all his Hitchcock stuff. But I think this is kind of the role that really kind of established. I mean, there's George Bailey, but honestly, George Bailey has a lot of asshole qualities, especially towards the end there. Which is how another character that gets lost to alcoholism. But as far as that Jimmy Stewart likability that everybody knew him for, this is kind of the part that really, really makes that. It's probably a performance that's bigger and better than the movie it's in. But the movie is still a really, really great piece of well-constructed comedy.
Mm-hmm.
And that's not to take anything away from The Beaver, though. The Beaver is still a really well-done movie that really works well with a very outlandish concept, which is a hard thing to do. And it does go off the rails sometimes in a way that you're really not sure about. But it's still definitely something that's kind of... It knows what it's doing. And the people who made it knew what they were doing. And that's good.
All right, so ends another edition of Versus. Next week, your cryptic comment is a dirty cop. Try to figure out what direction we're going in that one. Continue to watch the segments here on the Podcast Network for the rest of the week. We have a Gaming with Ash returning tomorrow, WWE Monday Night Raw podcast, 11:30 p.m. tomorrow night, as well as the Wednesday Wrestling podcast, now covering Ring of Honor on 9:30 p.m. on Wednesday. Sip and Snack with Random Tales on Thursday. Friday, AJ's movie reviews is The Nice Guys, as well as Green Room. And also in that will be Angry Birds and Neighbors 2. Saturday, who knows what's going to happen. And Sunday, like I said, that Versus. Halloween Horror Nights news, hopefully coming soon. And if it does, we'll have a podcast based on that as well. Purchase your Podcast Network merchandise, Zazzle.com/Podcast Network. There's a 15% off code right now. Check out Zazzle.com to find out more information on that. So that being said, I want to thank you guys and girls out there for watching. AJ, any parting words?
That's it.